The room was dim, lit only by the pale morning light filtering through a cracked window. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, disturbed only when the wind shifted, rattling the thin curtains against the walls. She sat near the corner, her back pressed to the cold, rough plaster, knees drawn up to her chest. Her fingers traced idle patterns on the floor, nervously, as if touching the ground could somehow anchor her in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. He stood near the doorway, silent, leaning against the frame. His eyes scanned the room as though trying to memorize every detail: the chipped paint on the walls, the uneven floorboards, the small, battered table that had once been the center of a home. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Morning already," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. She didn't look at him, she couldn't. There was something heavy in her chest, something that made even speaking feel like an effort. Hunger, fatigue, and the unspoken fear of the days to come weighed on her. He stepped forward, careful not to startle her, and placed a small bundle on the table. She glanced up, eyes wary, and noticed the modest offering inside: a few scraps of bread wrapped in a cloth, enough to tide him over, though far from a proper meal. He didn't speak, just nodded gently toward it, his expression steady, patient. She hesitated. Her pride wrestled with necessity. She wanted to say no, to claim that she could wait, that they could survive on nothing for a little longer. But the faint smell of the bread, warm, earthy, real, broke through her resistance. The corners of her mouth twitched as she struggled to smile, unsure if she wanted to laugh or cry. He crouched beside her, the weight of his presence offering silent reassurance. "We can start the day," he said softly, and there was no demand in his voice, only an invitation, a quiet insistence that survival didn't have to be endured alone. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the tiny room, the two figures within it, the small acts of care unnoticed. And yet, in that unremarkable space, with morning light spilling over rough floorboards and worn walls, a fragile connection began to take root, one that would sustain him through the uncertainty of the days ahead. The wind rattled the shutters, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere beyond the town. She sat at the edge of the small bed, staring at her hands as if they might offer answers she could not find elsewhere. The day had begun in silence, the heavy kind that presses down on your chest and makes every movement seem slow and deliberate. She could hear the faint creak of the floorboards as he moved about the room, preparing something she dared not hope for. He hummed quietly, a low, almost imperceptible sound, as he set a pot on the old, scarred stove. The aroma of cooking filled the air, subtle yet comforting, stirring something she hadn't felt in days: hope. Her stomach tightened with hunger, yet her pride made her hesitate. She had said she could wait, that they could manage a little longer, but every fiber of her being rebelled against the emptiness gnawing at her. "Sit down," he said softly, without turning to look at her. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She rose slowly, each movement deliberate, as if stepping toward the table could somehow bridge the distance she felt inside. The pot hissed as he lifted it carefully, steam curling into the air like fragile tendrils of warmth. He set it before them, a small offering of sustenance, not enough to fill the belly completely, but enough to remind them both that survival was not just about enduring hunger, it was about sharing it. She reached for a spoon, hands trembling slightly. Each bite was tentative, cautious, as if consuming the food could undo some unspoken vow she had made. He watched quietly, his presence steady, grounding her in a world that often felt precarious. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in with the promise of rain. The room felt like an island, safe and warm, insulated from the uncertainty beyond the walls. Conversation was unnecessary, the quiet between them spoke volumes, each gesture and glance carrying the weight of understanding and care. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to relax, to let the warmth of the food and the steadiness of his presence fill the emptiness she had carried. In that small, dimly lit room, amidst the scent of simmering stew and the whisper of the wind, they found a fragile comfort, one that reminded them both that even in the harshest times, small acts of care could hold the world together. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the cracked window, painting the room in muted gold. Dust floated in the beams, disturbed only by the movement as he shifted a chair closer to the small table. She sat opposite him, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor that seemed safer than meeting his gaze. The room was silent, yet the weight of unspoken thoughts filled every corner. He placed a small, worn bowl between them, the edges chipped, evidence of years of use. Inside, the contents were simple: roots, scraps of vegetables, a thin broth, but to her, it looked like a feast. Her stomach tightened at the sight, a reminder of the hunger that had shadowed her for days. Still, her pride held her back. She hesitated, as if accepting the meal might betray some unspoken rule she had set for herself. "I made it for us," he said softly, his voice steady yet gentle. "We can eat now, or wait." "But," he paused, searching for the right words. "But I don't want us to go hungry if we don't have to." She looked up then, her eyes meeting his for the first time that day. In them, she saw patience, care, and something unyielding, an insistence that sometimes survival meant accepting help, even when it was hard. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached for the bowl with tentative fingers, each movement slow, deliberate, as if testing the world's permission to take what she needed. He watched quietly, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He did not speak, did not rush her, simply offered his presence as a shield against the shame she felt for needing sustenance. As she lifted the spoon, steam curling around her fingers, the aroma reached her nose, and a sense of warmth spread through her chest. Each bite was careful, measured, yet with every mouthful, her tension eased. The simple act of eating together became a ritual, a reminder that even in scarcity, there could be moments of shared comfort and quiet connection. Outside, the wind stirred the thin curtains, carrying the promise of rain, of a world moving on regardless of the struggles. Yet inside, the room remained a sanctuary. With every shared bite, every silent glance, they found solace in the present moment, a fragile yet profound affirmation of life and care. When the bowl was nearly empty, she finally allowed a small, genuine smile to appear, and for the first time that day, the heaviness that had burdened her seemed to lift just slightly. The room was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching and shrinking with each flicker, giving the small space an almost ethereal quality. She sat cross-legged on the worn mat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor as if it held some hidden answer. Hunger had gnawed at her all day, a constant, insistent ache, but still she murmured softly, "We'll eat tomorrow." The words carried more weight than mere planning. They were a shield, a way to protect herself from the small, simple comfort that now sat just within reach. He knelt beside the low table, careful not to make a sound, and placed a plate of food before them. Steam rose in gentle spirals, curling upward like wisps of hope. The meal was modest, simple: pieces of bread, a thin stew, but it was enough to remind him that survival could still feel like a small celebration. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering, and in it was an insistence that could not be denied. "Eat today," he whispered, his voice low but carrying a quiet urgency. It was not a command, nor a plea, just a gentle urging, a reminder that taking care of oneself was not weakness. The words hovered in the air, delicate yet powerful, and she felt the gravity press against the hesitation that had kept her from reaching out. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the plate. Pride and fear warred with necessity, every instinct urged her to wait, to ration, to hold on a little longer. But the warmth emanating from the food, the sincerity in his eyes, and the quiet reassurance of his presence broke through her resistance. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out, lifting a piece of bread to her lips. Each bite was tentative at first, then more confident, as if rediscovering a rhythm she had almost forgotten. He watched in silence, not pushing, not judging, simply allowing her the space to accept care and nourishment. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, indifferent to the small ritual. Yet inside, the room seemed suspended in a moment of fragile peace, held together by shared presence, warmth, and the simple act of eating. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his, and a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. For the first time that day, the weight inside her chest lifted, if only slightly, and the promise of tomorrow could wait, at least for now.